Okay, this is going to be a beginning of a series on this book called Paul on Trial, the Book of Acts as a Defense of Christianity. And I'm going to recommend to those who enjoy this channel and focusing on the problem of Paul and how to prove that to people. So, one of the more intelligent things we can do is to understand what the book of Acts is about, because it's now been very carefully proven to be a defense of Christianity in the upcoming trial of Paul in front of Nero, where Christianity's fate is at stake, not Paul's. Well, it is Paul, but primarily our concern was as a church that we would be delegalized, de-qualified to be even a religion. And we were operating under the auspices of Judaism's protection, legal protection under Roman law. What's going to happen to us now if we lose that, because Paul is going to be looked at as someone who brought in a Gentile to the temple, uncircumcised, defiled the temple. And what's the blowback repercussion for Christianity? Will we be regarded as a renegade, as a disruptive force, and not part of Judaism? And so that was not the intent. The church wanted to. The church did not want to be outlawed, wanted to stay under the auspices of the Judaism. So, and that's how they also viewed themselves. So anyway, that's a key thing, and you can prove it if you study and learn all the different proofs there are about that. So we're going to kind of go through this. I'm going to try to make these episodes short, between 10 to 15 minutes, and so you gradually will learn over time what the evidence is, and just spend maybe 10, 15 minutes a day. You can catch up if you miss a day or two very easily, uh, and then you can gain the insight. Now, this episode, I just want to kind of show you who this man, Mr. Mauck, is, the reaction that came to this book. It is relatively ignored amongst mainstream Christianity, and it could be because this is not the way they look at the Book of Acts. They always want it to be, this is all to glorify Paul, make him look like a hero, and they disregard the fact that the book ends while he's at Rome awaiting trial in front of Nero. And the book is written to a guy named Theophilus, who even the early church said was a magistrate judge working to help or review this case for Nero. So anyway, this is restoring a different perspective into the Book of Acts that we need to be able to communicate to people so they understand. And there's easy ways to prove that it is indeed. There's no other explanation for certain things that the Book of Acts includes. Most glaringly is the Marcel speech. I mean, Paul is literally saying God does not live. The who made the heavens and earth does not live in temples made of human hands. Now that was designed to appeal to a pagan mind. Their gods don't dwell in temples made of human hands. They actually dwell in Mount Olympus. But the God of Jerusalem, the Jerusalem temple, he lives in a temple made of human hands at the Jerusalem temple. So what Paul said to them is false biblically, and a Christian would see right through that if they, were willing to be objective, and they should be objective, but they don't. They're not objective. But the only reason that's in there is to appeal to pagans. So that's Acts 17. So if anyone disputes you on this issue, Acts 17 is the key, and I will remind you of that fact over and over again. So don't worry, you don't have to write it down. You're going to memorize Acts 17 if they give you grief and say, "Oh no, Paul, this is all about it, Paul being a great person." Because the other thing that proves, incidentally, is that he's a false person. He lies. Either he's a false prophet and he believes the God who created heavens and earth doesn't live in temples made of human hands, contradicting the law, contradicting the Christian doctrine. Jesus said that the God lives and God dwells at the temple. And he said in Mark, he said he dwells in the temple made of human hands. Same word, choreoptoi. So we'll go through all that later. But the point is, this book is essential for us to get grasp and understand how to argue the case. Plus, also it's useful to learn. So wait till you see some of the reviews that came up on this. And so what we're going to do, like hopefully something that gets you interested in listening to this. This is a book from 2001, and I've skimmed some of it. I haven't really read it thoroughly, so we're gonna kinda go through it together. I'll go for the highlights. We're not gonna do every page or anything like that. So let's see what we got here. So was Acts written to convince a pagan judge to advocate acquittal from Nero in the pending appeal as of the book of Acts? Okay, so that's the question. Or was Acts intended to encourage Christians to accept Paul as a valid Christian leader, as we are led weekly to assume? And that's the alternative narrative. So there's two different narratives. These are opposite of each other. And which is correct makes a big difference how you interpret Paul, right? So if it's this, Paul is, a valid Christian leader just by virtue of the book of Acts. If it's this, it was designed to win a Nero appeal in front of Nero because Paul got us in trouble when we were on the edge of being outlawed by Rome. Paul doesn't look so good anymore, does he? So he already starts with his foot in the pit there, and that's why I think this book has been ignored. So don't be surprised if people have pushed back on you and say that's ridiculous and that's absurd. But this lawyer Mauck is the author. He did a fantastic job. The people who have read this say. So I'm going to trust that they said it, and you're going to hear their book reviews. So this is what I read to see how good the book was. And there was a professor and another person who was a Bible student, and a few people that were reputable that were studying theology or Christian religion in school. Okay, and so the theory of the book is of the work. It's entitled "Paul on Trial." And that really doesn't tell you enough, if you ask me. He says Acts is an address to magistrate assistant to Nero to aid in acquittal. That's essentially what it is. It's addressed to Theophilus. He's a magistrate aid to Nero in the upcoming trial, and the Christian Church basically engaged Paul to find a way to get the church not get the church and Paul acquitted at the same time, meaning get the church out of this mess. And he does the gospel translation of the book of Hebrew according to another scholar, Evans, in that context. And then he does so this shows a cooperation with the Ebionite church, the core mother church. And then there is the book of Acts, which is designed to tell the story that would show you can see our founders, the 12, and the head bishop, James, come off looking good. If you read between the lines, they're not. If Paul did anything wrong going into the temple and letting Trophimus defile it, our leadership is shown in the light that they were not aware Paul had any unusual views at all. And they asked him to do Nazirite vow, and he went in there. He was doing that at the time, and his friend from Ephesus had traveled with him all the way from Ephesus, and that guy, walks off while Paul is in a ceremonial bath, according to Paul, and that's when the defilement occurred, and entering the past the middle wall in an uncircumcised state. So everything points to that there was an intent to make the traditional church, the apostolic church, look good, even if Paul lost. Just so you can read between the lines, they were trying to cover every base that they would win too, but they don't want him to be found guilty. If you win on that, then there's no chance the Christian religion would be outlawed. But if he loses, they also didn't want to have the Christian religion outlawed by Nero. Okay, so this is the title of the book. This is the subtitle book. And there's a forward, and this is Mr. Mauck himself. He's a partner in, I think it's near Chicago. And this is what it says about him. So I want you to get an idea of who he is. John Mauck is a founding partner of Mauck and Baker, has been an attorney for over 40 years, representing many churches and ministries in Chicago and across the nation to provide religious land use in illegally restricted areas. His work drafting the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, RLUIPA, which became federal law in 2000, has helped congregations across the country freely worship. He says, "For me, being a lawyer is about serving God." John says, "When you do something for a long time, it becomes a part of who you are, a part of your identity." I have to say, there's very few Christians I know who have actually put this on their main website for their law firm. So this is a very out front person about his Christianity. And I listened to his testimony in an interview, and it was very honest, it seemed to me. He's just, he was being very much searching, but he was not a Christian even when he went to law school. He remembered, when he was a kid, his parents brought him, well, not brought him, but he did study and was attracted to Jesus, read about Jesus, had some relationship with Jesus, but not in a strong way. And then he, drifted away, became a young lawyer, and then he's going to find Christ at that time. And I may or may not play the video for you, so I don't want to get your hopes up. I think I might wait for another episode today. And then in 1998, John was asked to testify before the U.S. House Committee on the Constitution concerning church zoning problems. He was also instrumental in originating parts of the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act of 2000, which has become essential in securing religious liberties for Americans of all faiths. He has written numerous articles on religious land use and given presentations on the subject to city officials and other lawyers. In 2001, he wrote Paul on Trial, the Book of Acts as a Defense of Christianity. In this work, John explains that the Book of Acts was written as a legal brief to defend the Apostle Paul on trial before the Roman Emperor Nero. So again, this is off of his webpage. And I'm going to show you, he gave a little comment on his salvation issue, so I wanted to share that with you.
I thought about it. One morning I'm shaving, looking in the mirror, and the light bulb went on. My wife is a sinner.
Did you miss the scripture that said, "For all have sinned"?
I hadn't found that scripture, but I found myself painted into an intellectual corner. Could it be possible, with all these sinners in the world, that I was the only one? I did not feel like I was a sinner, but I came to the logical conclusion that I am. And I needed that because I'm reading about who Jesus
Yes,
is. He's
yes.
the Messiah.
Yes.
He came to die for sinners.
Yeah.
Just knowing that Jesus died and rose again is not going to save me unless I am making a personal commitment for
right.
forgiveness of my own sin.
Right.
So that kind of put it together.
I thought that was interesting because he seems to say just believing in the death, resurrection, atonement of Jesus Christ, just believing in that fact doesn't save you. You have to make a personal commitment. And so he takes it more seriously than just believing in facts. So it's not a faith alone for salvation. But I don't think anyone's going to call him heretical or anything either. He didn't cross too many lines there, at least directly. Okay, so now his book is out published by a Bible Belt publisher, Thomas Nelson, very traditional. And this is the title of the book. And so I looked at a couple of places where it's offered for sale, and then looked for the book reviews. And here was Zellen in 2014. I keep referring back to the book and referring others to the book. The idea that Luke and Acts were written as legal briefs brings another dimension to the story of the beginning of Christianity. The added depth that the inclusion of apologetics is a plus. And here's another one. Kelly, Mauck's perspective on Acts, as far as I've been able to tell, unique. He defends his position well. Well, actually, it has an historical precedent in the early church. And then it was revived in the 1700s. And now he's bringing it back, or at least he attempted to. But again, I've noticed that there's an effort to ignore him, or a seeming effort to ignore him. And that's why I want to put enough videos out there to provoke attention. There's not a single YouTube video, and I went through page after page of articles where I put his name in and the title of the book, even a partial title. It never came up with his book being reviewed by anybody. And yet, look how foundational this is to Christianity. The way you perceive Acts totally depends on whether you understand why he's writing Theophilus both books. They're both addressed. Luke's Gospel and Luke's Book of Acts are both addressed to Theophilus. Okay. Now, the other thing I think that's important about it is the alleged claim that it was written, it only emerges in the hundreds. It proves that it was not written contemporaneous. Well, that's not true. So, the only reason you would compel yourself to write two books simultaneously, if you can prove, and we're going to show you, it's provable that it was written in defense of Paul before Nero, and it's not intended for Christians to read because it has that horrific heretical statement in Acts 17 at the Mars Hill of God does not live in temples made of human hands. That could never have been meant for Christians to read because we would all reject Paul just for that one passage. And nobody focuses on it because it's not convenient. It's an inconvenient fact that we don't like, and so we just ignore it. But that dispels any validity of Paul for Christians. But it's totally important to win a trial in front of pagans who think God does not dwell in temples made of human hands. So anyway, let's keep looking at the reviews. Then this is from Amazon. This is an Amazon page. And this was very thoughtful and it's a professor, Paul F. Mitchell. And Mauck said, it convinced me it's Luke's elogium to Theophilus. Elogium would be the legal brief in Rome, in Latin. It is not enough to know what a writer said. We must know why he said it in order to truly understand the work. My opinion is that Mauck, the attorney, has absolutely nailed it. It's coming from, yeah, well, yeah, he's written his own commentary on this. I've written my own commentary on Acts and taught it several times in classes. So this is a professor who did his own commentary, and he's saying this guy Mauck absolutely nailed it. To be quite colloquial, Acts is a poor history, but it is an excellent elogium, legal statement of facts required by Roman authorities, and seen as a legal document. We now understand why Luke wrote and why he didn't write about various things. That's exactly how you can tell the difference. And there's more things, like why did he include the story of the Python priestess? I mean, this is a pagan demonically possessed woman who is endorsing Paul's way of salvation for many days. That's very risky to tell Christians that Paul was being endorsed by a demon for many days and he does nothing. He accepts it. And she's not just a nobody. She's the most influential voice of all Europe for kings, could be win wars, everything. Whatever this woman said, and it was a job that was rotated by 3 women at all times, beginning in 500 AD BC, all the way to 381 AD when Theodosius outlaws the Delphic and Philippi oracles. They're all Python priestesses, and they can change history. These women were absolutely influential. And they would write on the floor and then have garbled talk, glossalia, if you will, and then their priest standing by would write down his interpretation of what she said. He would write it down, and then the person paying for the prophecy would then get it on a piece of paper, and that would be how this functioned. But whatever she said could become worldwide news in the Mediterranean. I mean, so this is not a nobody. Well, Christians wouldn't like to know that Paul is being endorsed by her, but pagans would. So we'll see if Mr. Mauck gets into that. Okay, so since reading Paul on Trial several years ago, plus other works, I've written my own history, emphasized commentary on Acts, and taught it several times in classes. Whether in print or in class, my teaching now has Mauck's Paul on Trial as the starting point and framework. That's how radically it changed this particular professor's approach to the book of Acts. And why? Because it's the correct view of Acts. It's indisputable once you look at the things I mentioned, Acts 17, the Mars Hill, Act 16, the Python priestess, and there's a lot more that they makes no sense that Luke would put it in there for Christians, because we would reject anybody who would be saying this if we wanted to make Paul acceptable to Christians. We don't want to know he's endorsed by demons, for many days and he does nothing. We don't want to know that she thinks he's teaching the way of salvation. We don't want to think that Paul ever said that God does not live in temples made of human hands just while he's still at the temple of Jerusalem. You see, so there's no way this book was meant for Christians to read and think well of Paul at all. You would walk away saying Paul is a false person, because he's teaching contrary to God's law in Mars Hill speech in particular. But let's continue. I digress. Okay, another review is, this was an absolutely insightful read. This is AIM. I was strongly encouraged to read the book by several friends who practice law, work for lawyers, or are in the law field. Each of them were able to give even further personal insight into the writings here, shifting my viewpoint greatly. As a minister of many years, I strongly encourage the study of this work. So this is a Christian minister. This was a thought-provoking read and has opened my eyes to a whole new way of understanding Scripture. Tyler Rose, one of my favorites. All of it's 4-star, 25 ratings. Looks like they're all 4-star. All I have to say is, wow, this book throws in a perspective so deep that the first chapter could spark a conversation lasting for hours. The rest of the book is just as amazing. This book, Paul on Trial, has become a frequent read and also an important reference tool. This book is in my top 5 of all-time favorites. So, by the way, you can see the price up here. This is of I'm speaking October 2022. It's $10.95 paperback, but that's for like the top quality. I saw it other places for $2 if you want a paperback. You can also get an electronic version, I'm sure. Here's Sue. This is the most recent, I think, 2013. If you are fascinated with the Apostle Paul, then this is the book for you. John Mauck's premise is that the book of Acts was written as a defense document for the Apostle Paul and other Christians while on trial in Rome. The author is an attorney schooled at Yale and Chicago Law School. Paul on Trial is as much about Acts as it is about Paul. I read the book while studying apologetics at Liberty. It has proved to be a very valuable textbook. So very high rankings. So that basically is the introduction I'm going to give. You've met Mr. Mauck. You've heard him talk. You've seen these positive reviews. So I hope this is going to intrigue you to want to learn more and find out more of how you would make this same argument, or maybe you're here to disprove the premise. So you want to see whether there are any weaknesses. And I'm going to be objective too. I want to know what's positive and arguments I don't think that are going to work. I'm going to tell people, because I don't want people who are trying to advocate this book to rely upon weak arguments. We want to have only the strongest proof for our contentions that Paul is somebody to not be regarded as trustworthy in the Bible. And we should be following Jesus instead, and he is trustworthy. This gentleman, Paul, is not. Okay, anyway, so I have my bias, but I'm always going to try to remain as neutral as possible and let you hear the contentions or arguments of this gentleman. It's just a view that is generally not being commented upon in any other forum that I can see. But it doesn't matter. We're going to pursue it and show you whatever he has to offer, and maybe it's as good as these reviews say. So we'll all wait and see. Okay, ciao. Good night. Bye.